and I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's event on behalf of the Alliances Française of Penang and Kuala Lumpur. This evening's program is being run in partnership with the Penang Institute. We're very grateful to be hosted by you here in your beautiful building, and for all your team have done to help with the event. Tonight's conference is also brought to you with the collaboration of various organizations which seek to foster connections between French and Malaysian culture. The conference is an initiative of the network of the Alliances Française in Malaysia and forms part of the monthly Monday Talks program of the Alliances Française of Kuala Lumpur. It is supported by the French Embassy in Malaysia and the Institut Français in Paris. Specifically, it is taking place thanks to generous support from the Fonds d'Alembert, which is intended to promote debate and discussion around crucial issues in civil society in a spirit of multidisciplinary collaboration. This evening, we are speaking about one of the most important and urgent issues facing us today, the question of how we as humans can improve the way we live in our natural environment and change the mutually destructive cycle that we are currently in. Tonight's topic is the sustainable city in the tropics. It is the second of a series of 5 conferences this year on the theme of urban biodiversity. This theme is especially relevant in Malaysia, which is classed as one of just 17 mega-diverse countries, harboring the majority of the planet's flora and fauna, and which is also one of the most rapidly urbanizing countries in Southeast Asia, with an urbanization rate of over 77% in 2020. We are honored to have distinguished experts on our panel to discuss tonight's topic. The pioneering green architect, Dato Dr. Yeang, Dr. Ronald Hall from the European Commission, and Audrey Tan from Think City, as well as the participation of the dancer and choreographer Aida Redza and artist Lisa Fu. Thank you all so much for being here with us this evening, whether in person or online. Finally, a short practical note. The program this evening will be in 2 parts, starting with a discussion among our panelists and a Q&A session, before a screening of Moved by Paddy, a project which recreated a paddy field in the middle of Georgetown, and a final Q&A session. The conference has been live-streamed and recorded as part of the web radio project of the Alliances Française. With that, I'm very happy to introduce Dato Dr. Ooi Kee Beng, the Executive Director of the Penang Institute, who will be moderating tonight's conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. Good evening, everyone, online and in person here at Penang Institute. I would like to start by thanking the Alliances Française for approaching us and having a discussion with us. Okay? A discussion with us about how the second in their series on urban biodiversity should play out. And we had a short discussion on that, and we agreed that what is actually important for Malaysians to listen to, and where sustainability is concerned, is how being in the tropics actually affects our conception of sustainability, not to mention other aspects of it, like how you conceive of it, how do you practice it, what your ambitions are where sustainability is concerned. One reason why we've been thinking like that was that very often when we see lists of livable cities of the world, we tend to end up with lists of cities that are found in temperate zones. It could be Melbourne, it could be European cities and whatnot. So that always got me to thinking about, isn't there something biased to start with when we conceive of what sustainability is supposed to be? Do tropical cities have to act like temperate cities in order to be considered, achieving sustainability, so on? So that is sort of the basic idea behind why we're discussing it today. Yeah. So we can start by, let me start by giving a definition of what the tropics is, right? So I'll quote from National Geographic. The tropics are regions of the Earth that lie roughly in the middle of the globe. They account for 36% of the Earth's landmass and are home to about a third of the world's people. The tropics are warm all year, averaging 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. This is because the tropics get more exposure to the sun. Because of all that sun, the tropics don't experience the kind of seasons the rest of the Earth does. The tropical seasons are broken up into just two, the wet season and the dry season. Now this is of course a slight generalization about the tropics, but close enough, I suppose. Yeah? Largely we're talking about a somewhat uniform region that covers a third of the world. But nevertheless, there are quite a lot of variations within the tropics. To paraphrase the topic of the day, I suppose what we are discussing is how do tropical conditions affect the art and the science of urban sustainability, if I put it that way. Well, we have with us three very distinguished speakers to speak about the subject. They have been introduced to you by Joel already, so I won't go into that. We have Dr. Ken with us, Audrey with us here on stage, and Dr. Ronald Hall. Sadly, the two men can't be here in person, but they'll be online, taking part in the discussions. So I'll start by having them say something about the subject, about themselves, and their interest in the subject.
So the Penang Nature-Based Climate Adaptation Program was designed to address rising temperatures and the increasingly frequent and severe extreme weather events, such as flooding, particularly in urban areas. And I think as most of you are aware of, Southeast Asia is one of the regions which will be the hardest hit by climate change. So over the past 2.5 to 3 years, the City Council of Penang Island, Department of Irrigation and Drainage, Penang, Think City and UN Habitat have been developing a nature-based climate adaptation program for the urban areas of Penang, specifically Georgetown and Bayan Lepas. And a funding application to the Adaptation Fund has since been endorsed and approved for implementation, which is expected to take place somewhere in the second quarter of this year. Next slide, please. And this is just to show the climate crisis that Penang Island is facing. We can see that the urban areas of Penang Island are significantly hotter. And there is a marked difference of as much as 8 degrees Celsius when we look at the urban areas of the island due to the urban heat island effect. And when we went on ground and on site, we also noticed this difference along Lebo Queen and Jalan Brown, just outside here in the morning. We realized that the difference in maximum temperatures were as high as 31 degrees Celsius. Which showed the impact of shading and also material selection. So you can see the area which are not shaded, they are generally significantly hotter. Next. And besides the rising temperatures, we noticed that the increased rainfall and changes in weather patterns are already causing significant damage in Penang. For example, the 2017 flooding, which was considered one of its worst. We noticed that more than 7,000 people were displaced, and areas which previously never flooded were in fact affected in this 2017 flooding. And essentially, we like to see this program as complementing the numerous climate mitigation initiatives that have been marked out in the Penang 2030 Action Plan. And this serves as an adaptive measure. The program serves to provide adaptation measure to build urban resilience. So the program is structured around 4 key components, namely the urban greening, the stormwater management, the social resilience and institutional capacity. So the urban greening seeks to reduce the urban heat island effect through the introduction of green elements such as pocket parks, tree-lined streets, green facades and rooftops, as well as an urban agriculture program. And this component, crucially, it will be informed by a study which we are currently developing with the National Landscape Department and botanic experts. It's called the Climate Resilient Street Tree Species Study for Malaysia. So the selection of trees that we're looking at will be guided by its profile, its climate resilience, its urban suitability, as well as desirable characteristics. And in terms of stormwater management, the program seeks to adopt a comprehensive nature-based approach in the form of upstream retention ponds, blue-green corridors, swales, and infiltration wells. And besides the build projects, the program has a social resilience component which includes vulnerability and baseline assessments, as well as targeted action plans for the most vulnerable groups in Penang, namely women and girls, the elderly population. And lastly, the program hopes to facilitate knowledge transfer through the setup of a knowledge management platform to upscale the use of nature-based solutions in Malaysia, the setting up of a Penang climate board, as well as a public health program. Yep, so I think that's sort of.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. We'll now move on to Dr. Ronald Hall, who's also joining us on Zoom. Dr. Hall has requested to start his introduction with a longer presentation on the EU and Malaysia and what the two units or the two polities have decided to work on where sustainable cities are concerned. Dr. Hall, please.
D'abord, je voudrais remercier l'Alliance Française pour l'invitation à parler avec vous aujourd'hui. Ensuite, je vais passer à l'anglais and wish everyone all the best from where I'm sitting here in Belgium, in Northern Europe, as we emerge from the winter, which this year was very mild. Another reminder that climate change is with us. We are experiencing climate change on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'm absolutely sure we do not fit the definition of the tropics that we heard in the introduction. Our climate, in spite of climate change, still remains rather different. That being said, it's clear that for tropical countries like Malaysia, and when I hear the previous speaker speaking about nature-based solutions, when I hear about issues such as flooding and so on, we obviously face many common challenges. Some of you may have seen the catastrophic flooding that we had in this country, in the east of Belgium, but mostly in Western Germany over the winter. The kind of events which have basically never been seen before. And we have the situation where these so-called 100-year events are happening every 5 years. So we very much want to work with countries like Malaysia in a cooperative venture and in a cooperative spirit. And that's what I want to talk to you about now. I'm not an expert, I should say at the outset, in ecology and environmental science, but I therefore asked for a few extra minutes to explain what we're trying to do to promote mutual understanding and improvement of policy and practice inside EU cities and regions, and in so doing, learning from countries and cities outside the European Union, and that of course today very much includes Malaysia. I'm going to try to share the screen. Is that working?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Okay. I myself am, as the introductory screen says, Senior Advisor to the Director General for Regional and Urban Development Policy in the European Commission. It's overwhelmingly part of the EU executive that is concerned with policies to develop the cities and regions inside the EU. But for the last 15 years or so, we have increasingly taken on an external dimension so that we can get a better service, develop a better service for the support of sustainable development in our cities and regions through cooperation with cities and regions outside the EU. And the main program, not the only program, but the overwhelmingly most important program we have at the moment is called the International Urban and Regional Cooperation Program, IURC for short. And I'm going to go through very quickly a presentation of IURC. It's a global program, and the areas of interest are the ones that you can see on the screen in front of you. So obviously, one half of the program is based in Europe, and then the other half of the program are the cities and regions across the globe that the European cities and regions will cooperate in. It's a fully funded program from inside the EU's budget, and supports different kinds of action that I will come to later with the cities and regions outside the EU. So we have, starting from the left, we are involved in North America, USA and Canada. We're involved in several countries, particularly those of the Pacific Alliance in Latin America. We're involved with China, Japan, and perhaps in the context of our discussion today, we have a major program in Asia and Australasia, embracing 9 countries, one of which you can see in bold, fully justified in this context, is Malaysia. So that, if you like, is the kind of international family for cooperation that the IURC program is seeking to promote. And there you see in front of you the main actors. We operate through the European External Action Service. That is my colleague Michel in EU FPI. He's approximately in the middle of China, I would say. But you also see that we have an office with Jacqueline Chang who is permanently installed to support the cooperation with Malaysia. And then you see the other teams from India on the left-hand side, down to Australia and New Zealand, and north to Japan and South Korea. So we're supported by a large team, and these are the people on the ground that are at your disposition in Malaysia for technical support. As is explained on the screen, that this is about supporting city diplomacy. We very much believe that while the major effort of international diplomacy is run by the national government and by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we believe that successful diplomacy also requires a bottom-up engagement, and hence our attempt through IURC to engage the cities and regions. And they will be working together to develop concrete action plans, UCAPs as they're called, Urban Cooperation Action Plans, setting out what they want to do together based on common interests which they have identified in a consensus process. And hopefully out of these plans will fall pilot projects to experiment in new actions on each side based on the knowledge that is being gained through the cooperation. It's a European program, so there is very much a focus on the priorities of the European Union, and those are first and foremost the priorities which are defined in the so-called EU Urban Agenda, which was defined in 2016, which has approximately 14 priorities. plus the EU's Green Deal, which is the overarching priority of the EU in the current context. But also, we're seeking to use IURC to advance the new urban agenda of the United Nations. So that is the framework for the cooperation. We're seeking that the cooperation should develop the themes from the source materials and to select, as I said, in consensus, a limited number of priority themes for cooperation and for the generation of pilot projects. The IURC Phase 1, which was known as IUC in fact, took place between 2017 and 2020, which means that we're now in the IURC Phase 2, which began last year, and as you can imagine, has almost entirely begun online because of the pandemic, but we are filled with optimism in 2022 that we will be able to have more face-to-face visits, and in that context I would very much like to have the opportunity to visit the participating cities in Malaysia. I confess I've only ever been to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and therefore my knowledge of the country is severely lacking. So the cities were established according to the timeline in April 2021, and we're working through the planning phase leading to physical study visits, we hope, which of course has not been possible in the whole of 2021, and drafting the urban cooperation action plans is the main activity for 2022 for this year, followed by study visits for the implementation, and later leading up until next year to the implementation of pilot projects in the agreed themes between the cities. The main objective of IURC, once again, is to build partnerships and create networks. In other words, generate a family of cities working on sustainable development in the areas that I showed you in the global map earlier. The idea is to promote knowledge exchange on key themes, and for example, the one that is shown in parentheses is the circular economy, which I know is a dominant concern, not just in Europe, but in countries such as Malaysia. So we have a lot to discuss in that context. But just taking up from what was said in the previous presentation, we very much are trying to introduce a new focus into sustainable land use and nature-based solutions in our sustainable urban development inside the EU, and clearly we would have a lot to learn from a country with such a highly developed policy on that theme in the case of Malaysia. The visits to the EU, we hope, will be an opportunity to see best practices, because urban development is a major priority. Sustainable urban development is a major priority of the EU and in the use of the EU's budgetary resources. We also say that we would like to show you some of our bad practices, because you can sometimes learn as much from things that do not work as from things that actually do work. Likewise, this will be mirrored by Malaysia's contribution and the opportunity to deepen our understanding of urban policy development in Malaysia, and then the cities themselves to identify the priorities for more intensive cooperation through the UCAPs and the pilot actions. The IURC program then is supported by a global knowledge platform where case studies and urban action plans can be uploaded, so that it's not just a case of a bilateral EU-Malaysian operation. You have access, both sides have access to what is happening in the contracts across the world, and indeed we are also open to contributions to the platform from cities that are not necessarily in the IURC program in the current phase. The UCAPs I've taken the agendas that I mentioned earlier, the EU Urban Agenda, the New Urban Agenda of the UN, the European Union's so-called Green Deal, and distilled them into what we regard as our 3 priority themes. So when we work with Malaysia, we're seeking agreement to work on the themes 1 to 3 that you see in front of you: ecological transition, urban renewal and social cohesion, and innovative, sustainable and carbon neutral ecosystems. So in fact, they're quite broad. They're not very constraining. The cities, I think, will find not too difficult to find their place inside these broad priorities, which are distilled even further in the slide in front of you. But I think for lack of time, I will not go into it just at the present time. The work with Malaysia had already begun in 2019 when we were running the so-called IUC program. Malaysia, as such, was not one of the countries that we were able to cover with our limited resources at that point in time, but nevertheless, we did use some of the resources of IUC to explore possibilities for future cooperation with Malaysia. And for example, we had a cooperation under IUC in 2019 and 2020 on the circular economy. Much of the cooperation and exchanges were done online, and climate action plans were one of the physical outputs of the cooperation. We also developed concept notes for digital enablers, for financing circularity in Malaysia, and for Penang's circular plastic economy, something that the Chief Minister, whose picture you see below, was very much engaged in. We also, under IUC 2017 to 2020, engaged with climate action development under the so-called GCOM, Global Covenant of Mayors program, which was run by my colleagues in the Commission in the Directorate General for Energy, and had direct involvement between the EU and Malaysia, where the cities concerned were constrained to develop climate action combat plans with indicators and evaluation mechanism so that it was oriented towards achieving concrete outcomes. And then we get happily down to 2021, where Malaysia entered as a full player in the IURC program 2021 to 2023, which kicked off last September. I mentioned already that our colleague Jacqueline Shang is on the ground coordinating the cooperation between the EU and Malaysia. You can even see, if you look very carefully, her email address, and clearly a key player. And what we have achieved so far are agreements to work between Bologna in Italy and Malacca City Council, between Exo Atlantico, which is a network of towns in northern Portugal, and Georgetown, which has been mentioned earlier, in Penang, and then Vila Nova Famalicão in Portugal with Penang, and last but by no means least, Maia in Portugal with Seberang. So this is already kicked off. They are already preparing their agreement on what they are going to work on, and it seems that at the moment, top of the list is emerging circular economy, nature-based solutions, revitalization of historic centres, and sustainable tourism. And we've already had one thematic webinar on the circular economy between EU and Malaysian players. And then there has also been participation at the Malaysian Urban Forum and at the EU event Road to Glasgow and Kunming, Combating Climate Change and Biodiversity Loss in Malaysia, which took place recently last October. This is where the Malaysian partners are located, in Portugal and Italy respectively. And these are the maps of the players in Malaysia, which of course is a map that you understand and are familiar with much more than myself. And We've also had a thematic webinar on green infrastructure, which took place last October, with Malaysia's involvement. And through that, we've learned a lot about your climate adaptation program and how the danger zone, so to speak, of high temperatures have spread throughout the country, not unlike what is happening in the summer in the European Union, not every year, but with some very severe impacts in some of the more affected years. And we've also had a Penang Portuguese exchange on waste management and the circular economy. Malacca and Bologna have been cooperating on nature-based solutions and culture. And the work is now reaching its 2022 intensive phase. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for your patience. And these are some further links. If you want to find out more about the IURC, how you can become engaged, how you might be able to help it achieve its objectives. And of course, as I've said, the local contact point is Jacqueline Chang, located in Malaysia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, for a very comprehensive presentation of your work and the IURC. May I now go back to Dato Dr. Ken Yeang? I think in the beginning, you gave a hint of what you want to talk about concerning this topic. Dr. Yeang, he's with us, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot more you would like to share beyond what you talked about in the beginning. Am I right? Does Dr. Yeang have a presentation?
I started to develop what I call the framework for ecological design.
Okay.
That in seeking solutions to the current environmental crisis, you cannot go about micro designs, micro solutions or incremental solutions. You have to be comprehensive and you have to be holistic. And so I started to think about what are the key components that you need to consider in ecological design. And this covers everything, not just what we do as architects, but also covers governance and society. To me, there are 5 components. The first is nature itself, which is an infrastructure, and that we need to design with positive environmental impact. The second factor is human society itself, our social, economic, political, institutional systems, which constitutes a second infrastructure. The third is our built environment, which is the physical infrastructure, the buildings, the utilities, the roads, drains, and sewerage. And then the fourth infrastructure is our energy systems, which has serious impacts on the environment. And the fourth is water, the hydrology. And if we were to work comprehensively, then we need to biointegrate all these 4 infrastructures into a whole: nature, human society, our built environment, our energy systems, and water. Now, biointegrating these into a whole is easier said than done, so that is the challenge of ecological design. This is what I try to do in all our projects. So in a nutshell, these are the key factors that we need to consider in managing our environment, our human activities. I mean, there's a lot more to what I need to say, but I think those are the key factors.
Thank you. Since we are focusing on the tropics for this evening, well, where biodiversity is concerned, when I first gave thought to this subject when talking to Alliances Française, was that biodiversity in the tropics, then I think of human diversity really as well, meaning cultural diversity. Sometimes in very small areas you have a lot of it, like Malaysia is a typical case of that. And of course biodiversity where germs are concerned. And I'm sure in some ways all this must play in when we plan for sustainability in urban living, crowded living, and so on. In many tropical cities, we have slums and squatter populations and so on and so forth. One could, of course, put all that down to a class discussion, but I wonder to what extent is it a discussion about developmental stages, and to what extent is it a discussion about life in the tropics? Do all cities in the tropics have to become like Singapore in order to have any chance at urban sustainability? You know, if I can throw that to the panelists to discuss how does urban living in the tropics, what special or unique problems come out of the tropics, living in crowded conditions in the tropics? Are there any special factors that one should immediately think of? Audrey?
I think I can respond from a climate and environmental perspective. As you rightly mentioned, Malaysia is one of 12 mega diverse countries, and safe to say that our well-being, our social economic development have benefited from the ecosystem services provided by that of mangroves, tropical rainforests, in the fields of agriculture, tourism. You know, they give cultural value. I think it benefits tourism and also livelihoods. But being one of the most climate vulnerable regions, I think we are faced with both the challenge and the opportunity to conserve and preserve our biodiversity, because if we look at the tropical rainforest, when we talk about carbon sequestration and also plant growth, I think there is huge potential for ecosystem-based approach in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation. So I think specific to Malaysia, it's our conservation of biodiversity. In that alone, we have significant potential in nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based approach.
Okay, thank you. And any other comments from the two gentlemen?
Could I just say that I fully agree, and indeed I think we had a lot of the key points made in the previous the presentation before my own on the importance of protecting green spaces and policies to prevent land take, as it is now called, through the unregulated expansion of urban areas into green spaces. We also have, from our history of cooperation, for example, with South Korea, a specific example where through greening, one of our partner cities was able to take 1 degree centigrade off the average temperature in the city area. So it's not a counsel of despair that nothing can be done. We need an integrated, multi-dimensional approach, including the protection of green space, but also action to promote sustainable mobility and control the quality of air, and go towards more greener mobility solutions. So I'm not too sure that we should be thinking that the future is unsustainable. It's about taking action as soon as possible, about engaging the partners in what we describe as the triple or even quadruple helix approach of national state, regional or urban state, business, the research institutes and civil society. it requires this integrated vision, requires a strategic approach, and it has to be multidimensional. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ken, is there any comment you would like to make?
I think we're covering too many things and too many items in today's discussion.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to.
I think the secret of success is focus. But in my opinion, there's so much that needs to be done to create a sustainable built environment, use of energy, hydrology, of given society. But one of my key issues is that if we're able to design and deliver the most sustainable buildings in the world, the most sustainable cities in the world, but what happens if we as human beings do not behave ourselves? We do not travel in a sustainable way. We don't eat in a sustainable way. We do not live in a sustainable way. So at the end of the day, the problem is not so much what we design, what we build, what our society systems, but our human habits, our human behavior has to change. And that, to me, is the crux of sustainable design.
Right.
But who's going to tell human beings to do what they have to do? You know, it's not my role as an architect to tell human beings what to do. I can only do what I do by example, show leadership by example. And I say, if you design and you build and you create the built environment this way, then these are some of the factors you have to consider. But at the end of the day, it's us as human beings that we have to behave ourselves. We have to establish the rules and regulations of living sustainably. So that's to me the ultimate factor that we have to address. And I just, we can talk about, all the cows can come home about, IUCR like this and that, and what's happening in Malaysia, interaction between Portugal and Yeang and Portugal and Penang. But the objectives are not clear. What do you want to do? I can have, Port Lisbon and Kuala Lumpur working together. For what goal? To achieve what purpose? End of the day, the five factors are important. How does it affect nature? I mean, ecology is not just about biodiversity, it's about phytoremediation of pollutants in the air. It is enhancing photosynthesis. And the built environment, to be a constructed ecosystem, we have to create habitats within the built environment. The willy-nilly planting of trees that you all talk about is a nice idea. But what sort of species are we selecting? We cannot have invasive species, because once you bring an invasive species into an ecosystem, you completely destroy the ecosystem. And so, ecology design is not just about biodiversity, it's about a whole host of factors. Nature does things. The young lady just now talked about ecosystem services. Now that's extremely important because nature does provide ecosystem services to the planet without human intervention. What is ecosystem services? Ecosystem services is photosynthesis, purification of water, recycling of nutrients, creating rich soils, sequestering of pollutants. There's a whole list of factors. Now, my biggest problem is that a lot of people don't understand ecology. And I contend that schools of architecture, schools have to teach ecology, because a lot of things that take place in nature you cannot see. Can you see photosynthesis? No. Can you see sequestering of pollution? No. Can you see the recycling of nutrients in the ecosystem? No. Can you see a species genetic development in the ecosystem? No. But it exists whether we want it or not. But if you continue to destroy the environment, devastate the earth, devastate the planet, very soon we won't have a planet left. So I think everything starts with learning ecology. And that is the most crucial aspect, whether we're talking about RC or whatever it is you're doing. If you don't approach it in an ecocentric way, then you're doing it in an incremental, doing it in a micro way, which not be effective. You have to think about everything in a holistic way. And that is the fault I find with human society. That is the fault with a lot of organizations. You're not thinking holistically in terms of the natural environment. You think in terms of specific items, thinking about, all you're talking about is bureaucracy. That's not going to save the planet. And so, the two aspects I want to leave in your mind before I leave the room, before you leave the room, is that to save the planet, we as human beings got to behave. We've got to learn how to live in the most sustainable way. In everything that we do, the way we move, the way we eat, the things that we do in the daytime, and so forth. The second is that we must understand ecology. If we don't understand ecology, then we're going around in circles talking about biodiversity. That biodiversity is great, but it's only one factor. And so the second point I want to leave in your mind is that we have to study ecology. Now, how many of you understand ecology? You are just going around in circles, And so my suggestion, my recommendation is go back to school, study ecology, then you look at the world differently. So that's the second point I want to make.
Thank you. Very important points, I think. Any response from our panelists on that?
I would be happy to come back if you will give me a minute or two.
Sure, Dr. Hall.
Yeah. I think that we definitely need to understand better ecology. I would not be optimistic that we can have a large-scale program for the population of the world to send them back to school to learn ecology, but perhaps the school systems and the curriculum should develop this aspect much more intensively than has been the case in the past. I think that, in many ways, Dr. Yeang and I are saying the same thing because he said it's about us changing our behavior. And another way of saying the same thing in policy language is that the solutions will never come top down. You actually have to involve the actors on the ground so that they take ownership of the actions that are being undertaken in their name. And that's why one of the key aspects of the cooperation we're developing under IURC is this so-called quadruple helix approach, so that you get the views of not just government, and certainly not just national government, but also the regional and urban authorities who have to live with the consequences of ecological damage, climate change, and so on. You have the advantage of involving the universities, and indeed in IURC, universities and research institutes have been among the major players. You have to involve business and business organizations and entrepreneurs so that practice can be changed in the way we produce in some of the ways that Dr. Yeang described. And last but by no means least, involve civil society who also have to live directly with the consequences of poor environmental management. And these are the lessons that IURC is seeking to put across in a modest way, because we simply do not have the resources to cover every city and region on planet Earth, and many would not want to be involved in any case. But we still think that this is an important opportunity for the development of policy and practice in these fields. You cannot rely on people doing an ecological course and being transformed. You actually have to demonstrate the value of certain kinds of action and demonstrate the damage done by certain other kinds of action through, well, in a global context, it's got to be through cooperation, because these issues are not geographically specific, they are global, and therefore it's for that reason that we established this global IURC cooperation program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Audrey, you look like you want to say something?
No, I agree actually with what Dato Ken mentioned. I think when we talk about ecosystem services, there are so many aspects to it, and of course on ground, as people, I think over the years we have become a little bit more conscious of what we consume, not just what, but also how it's processed. But at the end of the day, I think there needs to be systemic changes for sustainability to be attained, particularly in areas such as energy production, our production and consumption patterns, our energy mix. So there is a whole bigger picture to it, and yeah, I don't disagree with his opinion.
I would agree from the first word that Dr. Ken was saying, that we have to be holistic where such issues are concerned, right? So let's say even in Malaysia, in Penang, there is rising consciousness, I think, about the ecology and whatnot, but I doubt it's growing fast enough compared to all the other dynamics that are negative, like waste management, for example, where waste management is a big problem all over the world, plastics, and so on and so forth. And whether education alone is going to stop it, because it might be too late, and so on and so forth. But let me go on to something that I tend to see as an elephant in the room, if you like, where sustainability is concerned, and that is overpopulation, population growth. We can, arrange all the dynamics and policies we want, but can we really do it while the world's population continues to grow at the rate it's doing? Any comments, gentlemen? Any comments, Audrey, on that? Are there drastic measures that actually need to be done politically if we are to have any chance of building a sustainable world?
Or maybe I'll just give a short response to it. I think, like you mentioned, the growing population in cities and whatnot, I think, as we know, it's inevitable. I think our urban population in Malaysia stands at 80%, if I'm not mistaken. And I think now it's more of a question of how adaptable we are, because I think the rural and urban migration, it's something that came about with our agriculture-intensive economy. As we move to a more services and manufacturing-driven economy, that is something that we can't avoid. So besides mitigating greenhouse gases, our carbon emission, I think what is key now is adaptation. How do we adapt to more frequently extreme weather events that are taking place, things like that. I think the balance between the built infrastructure that are there in place to reduce vulnerabilities, and how does that affect adaptation? Because as we build more, no doubt there will be emissions of greenhouse gases. So I think it's a balance between both mitigation and adaptation when it comes to our built environment, our infrastructure.
But can we just rely on population growth slowing down because we are becoming middle class or becoming urban? Is that a reliable way to go, or are more drastic measures needed? I'm just wondering. Gentlemen, any comments on that as well?
If I could jump in just for a few seconds, I fully understand the point. The sheer pressure being put on the Earth's resources and on the quality of air, land, and sea through development at an ever increasing pace. And one of the key elements of the response and one of the priorities for our IURC program is to develop policy and practice in the field of the circular economy, because as we now know, if everyone on the planet is to become anywhere near as wealthy and consume as much resources as, say, the typical dweller in the most developed economies like the United States, we will need several planets of natural resources to sustain that. So circularity is clearly one of the responses. But apart from that, you asked the question: can we rely on population reduction? And in many ways, as we look forward over the next decades, it looks like the population is set on course for decline. Certainly it seems to be in much of Europe, and we have many regions in the European Union where the average number of children per woman of childbearing age is now below 1, so well below the reproduction rate for the population. Closer to Malaysia, although not terribly close, of course, you will be well aware of the way that demography is emerging in Japan and in South Korea, not to mention in China. So it does look that for large swathes of the planet, we are heading towards population stabilization and indeed decline. The problem is, how do we address the challenges in areas where there is still a very large growth in population, and where there are very large levels of outward migration because the home territory cannot support economically the large families, and so you have these migration movements across the world. That seems to me to be one of the major challenges as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Another issue tied to this, of course, would be the growing inequality, or I assume there is growing inequality all across the board in many ways. Over the last 20 years, I don't think we did talk very much about that before the last 20, 30 years, but we now talk about the 1%, and that is clearly a reflection of this sense that more and more wealth are going to less and less people. For population reduction, I think there tends to be a connection between people becoming wealthy and more middle class and having less children. But if the inequality continues, then that sort of eats into that dynamic itself. Are there any comments on that, the question of inequality? Otherwise, I think we'll move to the Q&A period. And any final comments, perhaps we could put it that way? Audrey, Dato Ken, and Dr. Hall.
Just as a remark in relation to the point you make about inequality, I think that that is very well made, and I think that you would have no trouble finding employment inside the institutions of the European Union, in the sense that our global policy framework in the European Union is based on a triangle of priorities, and no point in the triangle is more important than the other two. And the 3 points are economic progress, environmental protection and sustainability. But the third, touching on what you said, is to support social cohesion. So in other words, the impacts of policy on the economy, on the environment, should not be at the expense of social cohesion, and therefore quite often that means that we have to have accompanying measures in order to seek to prevent a rise in inequality, which ultimately undermines the success of policies to protect the environment, promote sustainability, or even to develop the economy itself. So we very much agree that social cohesion is a key element, and the efforts to reduce inequalities emerging as society progresses.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hall. Any last words, Audrey?
No, I think Dr. Hall put it very well. I think definitely there needs to be social cohesion. I think when we talk about climate change, we know that the vulnerabilities are magnified in this community. So I think when we talk about sustainability, how resilient we are as a community, I think definitely vulnerable groups need to be engaged with. Even if they're in the cities, I think that's what he spoke about, you know, the growing of slums. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed in order to move forward. I think that should be considered a part of development, not just how developed our built environment is.
Right, thank you. Dato Dr. Yeang, any last words from you?
I think it'd be useful if you can summarize today's discussion into a series of items for action. And then this event becomes actionable. Otherwise, it becomes another what I call a hot air event. You know, everybody sort of gives out a lot of hot air and talking, and after that we all go to sleep. So summarize everything into a series of actionable items. Then who is to do these actionable items, and when? Now that's project management. That's what you should be doing. Actionable items, by who and by when. Otherwise, it's just another hot air session, which is great. You know, I love speaking to you. It's 2 hours past my dinner time. But, you know, take this event, make it into something, make it into an actionable proposition. Then you're doing something important, doing something relevant. Otherwise, it's just, you know, a bunch of us, you know, saying things, talking to each other, and in 20 minutes' time, when all is over, then we all forget about it. How do you translate this into something that's actionable? And that's your job. Think City, Penang Institute, make something out of today's event. Then it means something. Okay? This is what I think.
Thank you, Doctor. Shall I pass over to Asma for the Q&A? Any questions from the public here?
Hello. Very good evening. I want to thank the panel who organized this. It's very interesting. It's really happening. And I want to echo Dr. Ken. His master plan is really fantastic. In fact, Penang is an example. Because during the 18th century, when the British were here, Penang is a place of heaven. That's why it's called Pearl of the Orient. Everywhere you go is green. You can walk from Balik Pulau all the way to Georgetown, no issue. Now, because our ecosystem, as what Dr. Ken says, is out of balance. Why? Because we have so much development in Penang. Look at the Google map. how many greens have turned into red? And I also want to echo Dr. Ken just now. What are we doing? We have a plan, but there must be a roadmap, and who is responsible to do that? Yes, all the think tank, the IURC, they have master plan. It's very good. But we have to catch up. We are crawling, as what Dr. Ken says, if I'm correct just now. We are very slow. So it's back to individual. It has to start with me and you. Just like basic planting a tree. That changed the ecosystem. If everybody in Penang plant one tree, if people behave, how they eat, how they do things. I want to quote an example. I hope people are not hurt. Just now I went to the lavatory, the pantry, the light is on, the fan is on. So it's energy. It's one of Dr. Ken's, you see the ecosystem? It has to start with us. So that's all from me. I'd like to thank the group again. It broadens our knowledge. At the same time, it's a wake-up call for everybody. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. There wasn't a question there, I think, right? It's just a...
My personal opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Any other question, please, from the group? Yes, sir?
Hi, I want to circle back to what Dr. Ken was saying about holistic thinking and human habits and behavior needing to change, and maybe asking about environmental education going back to the elementary level. There is no standardized curriculum for environmental education, although we do have the Sustainable Development Goals to model everything after. A lot of curriculum, like the NCUK or any curriculum really actually, doesn't have a standardized environmental component to it. So students are going all the way through their 12th year of school without having any ecology education whatsoever. And the only things that we're seeing in schools are individual initiatives, and they're all disconnected from each other. So is there a way that we can design spaces so that these invisible ecosystem services that Dr. Ken mentioned before are actually visible, where you can see what is happening in the environment around you and standardize a curriculum around it? And how can you get everybody to agree on that? I guess that would be the bigger question.
I could perhaps tell the group that at this very moment, the Penang State government has agreed for us to work towards turning the middle bank area off the coast of Penang on the west side into a sanctuary, a marine sanctuary, where that can then be used for educational purposes and so on and so forth, so that it's also clearly visible, because it will be right in the middle of Penang State itself. The middle of Penang State is actually the waters, it's not the land, right? So that, I think, is one good way of making an ecology visible to the people living here. Yes.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the panel and the speakers, the eminent speakers, for the input today. I'm not saying anything new, but just reiterating what has already been said. First of all, I'd like to say that these eminent speakers have said that all these are concepts and theories that we have been hearing. But what is important now is the human behavior and how we need to change the human behavior. How do we translate that into action? I like to go back and reminisce the past, but the past is no more with us. We are now present in the future. We are present and we are going into the future. So where can we go? There's also another comment that man made, that we need to look from top down or bottom up. whatever that case may be, we are still fighting who is going to do it, whether it's the top or bottom. And we seem to be in a quandary now. Nobody is doing anything. At the end of the day, we don't want to get down into a situation where it is just rhetorics that we are looking at. There are so many areas of sustainability that has already been mentioned here, but I'm not going to look at all the areas, but just to highlight a few areas of my concern. Concern as a layperson with staying in Penang, and my concern comes from my daily traveling around Penang. The first area that I'd like to look at, are there any plans in Penang to designate areas as green lungs, or has there already been done? I want to know, and this has to be made known to others. We are lay persons, we may not be fully involved in ecological studies or things like that, but from the media or from information that can come out, this is a necessary input for us. So how much of a green lung or even water space has been allocated or designated, like the heritage city of Penang? In the heritage concave, we have certain buildings that has been designated as heritage building. How much more do we need certain areas within Penang to be designated so that it cannot be raped or misused by others? The second point that I like to highlight is that my journeys to my understanding of Penang is it is both the island and Seberang Perai. So I like to see what are the developments that are taking place in both these areas, not just on the island. Sometimes the Seberang people feel they are left out in the development of the total concept in Penang. Now, as I travel past Penang Bridge to Seberang Perai on a sunny day in Penang Island, but as I cross, I see the whole Seberang Perai is polluted. There's haze on a Sunday morning. You know, when you drive down to Seberang, that whole area, you cannot see anything. And that's not only a Sunday. All other days could be similar to that. Now, I understand that the state government wants to develop Penang as a hub for development and tourism, as well as investment, economic investment. But my question here is this: how far has the factories that has been established in Penang given guidelines to waste management and pollution? Are there? Possibly there are, I don't know. As I said, I'm a layman. Possibly there are. But I like to know all the factories in Penang Island, as well as Seberang, their portfolio in waste management and pollution, and their plans for ecology, ecological sustainability. The third point is that Penang has two assets, like we all know, the sun and the water. It's ample here. I think we are blessed in Asia with sun and water throughout the year. But how much teaching has gone into our various academic institutions and schools in harnessing the sun and conserving water? How much of that teaching? So I like to see that something has been done on the grassroots. I like to see some development, as the eminent professor has mentioned. It's the grassroots, it's the human nature. And where can we change the human nature? It is from education, the grassroots education. I like to see something like, I have been studying researching on this area, I noticed that in England, they have something called UK ROCH, and they have a plan to encourage people in 4 specific areas. And they say, if your building is able to maintain that 4 areas, we'll give you a medal. I'm looking at something of that nature where the Penang Institute can come up with a plan and encouragement that can encourage houses and religious buildings as well as factories, and give them a medal saying that if they can comply to 4 basic things of ecological needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those points. Well, just one comment on the green lung. Well, quite recently, Penang was granted the UNESCO, Penang Hill was granted the UNESCO Biosphere registration, whatever you call it. It's quite a large area, so the whole of Penang Hill, the northern side of it, all the way over to Muka Head and all that, that is designated as a green lung, I suppose you call it. So it's quite a large part of northwestern Penang Island that is now a UNESCO listed green lung. Yeah. Next question. Well, any comments to all the comments that have been made from the panelists, if there are any?
Okay. I think that one of the, you must not look at Penang Island entirely in terms of vegetation, because the ecology of the island is not just the land area. It includes the water area. That's the ecology of the sea. Now, if you've been living in Penang for some time, as I had when I was a child, Gurney Drive used to be a wonderful place. I used to walk around Gurney Drive with my mother. I can go down to the waterfront. I can dip my feet into the water. But look at it now. My goodness, it's just reclaimed land. What happened to Gurney Drive? So that's only Gurney Drive. And you talk about Penang Island, we should, preserve the waterfront areas, the aquatic ecology of the island. Now they're going to plan to build 3 islands on the south of Penang. You know about the 3 island projects, right? They're going to reclaim the land. That will radically change the waterfront ecology of that location, besides the social impact on the village people. But who's doing anything about this? Are you going to do anything about it? Who's doing anything about it? It's terrible what the people are doing to Penang. Gurney Drive is no longer the Gurney Drive I knew back in 1950. And very soon, in the year 2025, the area south of Penang Island will have 3 huge new islands in it, totally destroy the ecology of the sea. Because when you reclaim land, you are affecting the ecology of the sea. And the amount of reclamation going on will radically change the aquatic ecology of Penang. And so this is something that somebody has to look into. I'm just an architect and I just design buildings. And even doing that is a full-time occupation and trying to make them ecological. But it is the people of Penang who has to take action. Are you taking action? We lost Gurney Drive. Very soon you're going to lose the whole of the south part of Penang. Aren't you concerned about that? Can you ask the audience, what do they think about it? Aren't you concerned? That's a serious question. Penang is no longer the same island as it was back in the 1950s when I was a child. It is a totally different geography and ecology.
Thank you.
I would ask the audience, what are you going to do about it? You know, let me ask the audience.
Dr. Hall, any last words? He can't hear us either.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. You've given me a lot of space already in this in the course of this conference, so I thank you for your generosity. Just as a final remark, firstly, I am encouraged, and I know my colleagues are encouraged who are directly engaged in the cooperation with Malaysia, in the many concrete actions that are being taken. But of course, we start from a position where the challenges are absolutely enormous on the one hand, and where we, as has already been said, have to be careful that in the way that we move forward, we also are able to take our populations, and perhaps particularly the more disadvantaged populations, with us. So it's a complex, multidimensional task. What I would say is that I would recall one of our key principles inside the European Union, which some of you may have heard of, which is the principle of subsidiarity. And the principle of subsidiarity means that action should be undertaken by the level at which it is most appropriate to conduct the action. So that means that there are clearly roles for international cooperation, for example, on climate change, because the problems cannot be solved individually by countries. There is a clear task for the national government to implement those policies using the resources and administration that they have at their disposal. And then there is also an important level below the national level, which are the regional and urban authorities, representatives of business, the research community, and civil society in addressing the issues. And through the IURC program, what we are trying to do is to give a voice to the regional and urban level, and to the key partners at that level that I have mentioned. And we believe that through this sub-national, bottom-up diplomacy, we can make some real progress, notwithstanding the fact that, as Dr. Yeang has said, the challenges are considerable.
Thank you. I think we have to end this part of the evening for now, right, Asma? Yeah. Asma, thank you to all the panelists. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Asma?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll just take a 5-minute break and then proceed with the presentation by Lisa, Fu, and Aida Redza. Thank you very much.